Hi, hope you're well. Today we're going to be talking about Savannah and the horror hotspots that have developed within it. Now, I gotta shout out my friend Jason for giving me this topic to talk about. He knows probably too much about all the horror stuff that goes on in this state, but it works out for me. And just a little content warning, maybe. Some of these stories have kind of gruesome subject matter, so if you're sensitive to that, murders, ghosts, stuff like that, then, well, you've been warned. Anyways, here is what I wrote about Savannah. Savannah is a city on the coastal edge of Georgia. It's deeply rich in history. It was founded back in 1733 by a man named James Edward Oglethorpe, and it stands as the oldest city in the state of Georgia. The city itself breathes out its history through its architecture, a living testament to the town planning of the 18th century. Spanish moss clings to 100-year-old trees and buildings here, and the central squares, fountains, and historic buildings capture an incredible patchwork of various inspirations. From Gothic churches to antebellum mansions, the city is just about as historic as it gets in North America. But it is as beautiful as it is haunted. The city has seen the colonial period into the modern day, and as a result, it has collected a number of ghosts. The city has been subjected to fires, hurricanes, 2 yellow fever epidemics, the slave trade, the Civil War, and the murders of countless Native Americans, as well as some more gruesome killers. Even non-superstitious people can feel the weight of the unsettled souls here, staining the streets in their crimson blood, and tourists here are drawn like a moth to a flame. Tours of all kinds are hosted in this city, but the more morbid ones are especially popular. They have spooky trolley tours, walking tours, pub crawls, and even hearse rides, all to relay the city's macabre history. Some are catered to all ages, but others are far more gruesome. Morbid curiosity sells, and one of the most popular examples of this is the Sorrel Weed House. The Sorrel Weed House is especially popular because people can actually go in and tour the inside of the house. It was first built in the 1830s for a man named Francis Sorrel. He was a very wealthy shipping merchant, and at the time, he wanted a house that could reflect this wealth. I'd say he definitely got this out of the house. It's got gilded mirrors, crystal chandeliers, a grand piano. It was a perfect focal point for the parties he liked to host. Things were all well and good until about 1859, when he had to sell his home to a man by the name of Henry Weed. Then, he and his wife moved into the house next door, but that same year, something awful happened. Matilda, Francis's wife, discovered that he was having an affair with an enslaved girl named Molly. She was so distraught that she killed herself. Not long after, Molly was found hanging dead, and Francis Sorrel died not long after because of a stroke. After the Weed family went bankrupt, the house was bought up and it was opened as a state landmark in the 1940s. Now today, some paranormal activity has happened around it. People who tour this house say they see ghosts in the reflections and they feel an evil energy here, especially in the basement. Some people also claim their watches and phones are mysteriously zapped of power, even when they came in with a full charge. Because of how popular this place is, a number of investigations have been held to figure out just how accurate this history is, and surprisingly it checks out. Matilda's suicide has been confirmed, and the existence of Molly, the slave girl, has also been confirmed. The only thing that's debated is the idea that it was an affair. I mean, there's only so much consent that there can be out of an enslaved girl and, an older man. I don't really think affair is the right word for that, but it does show that there was something dark that went on here, and it does fall into this theory that Molly didn't kill herself. She was actually murdered by Francis Sorrel. The theory specifically goes that he was so frustrated that his wife killed herself that he murdered Molly out of anger. Though that part is, just speculation, it's not technically proven, I think that's pretty realistic, and it adds a surprisingly dark note to a very popular tourist spot. I've been to Savannah myself, and I've seen this house, and I've never gotten to go in though, but now that I know the history, I think I would go in, just to see what it's like. Moving on. Next up, we have the Hamilton Turner Inn, which was so popular there was a book written for it called A Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It was built in 1873 for another popular man at the time, a man by the name of Samuel Pugh Hamilton. Before it was converted into an inn, it was originally a mansion with 17 rooms, a tin roof that helped it survive a massive fire, and it was even the first house in Savannah to have electricity installed. After retiring as a naval officer, Samuel spent his time collecting art, and he liked to use this house as his own personal museum. He even had so many pieces of art that held so much value to him that he hired a man to stand on his rooftop with a rifle to guard it all. But one day, after the night had passed, the guard hadn't come down from his station. As it turned out, Samuel went up there and found the man dead, lying in a pool of his own blood. Someone had shot him in the back of the head. After that, things didn't take the best turn, though Samuel did take up the rifle and stand on the rooftop at night. He only took the man's place for a few months, however, because shortly after he fell sick and died too. I think that'd be enough to make an interesting haunted house, but believe it or not, there's more. We fast forward to 1915, and a man by the name of Francis Turner buys the house for his family. They move in, and things are all good and well. He's a doctor, he's a very established person in the community, and he likes to hold his practices in the basement of their home. He also liked to have lavish parties in this basement, and when that happened, he'd send his kids upstairs not to come down to the basement. The only thing about that was, he had a daughter who was a very curious type, and she was always wondering what it was they did down in that basement in their parties. This is something that would lead to tragedy. One night, the daughter really wanted to see what was going on down there, so she rolled a billiard ball down the stairs for an excuse to pick it up, and she tripped and fell down the stairs and died that same night. In the 60s, the house was taken up by the Savannah Historic Society, and later it cycled through owners, and eventually it was converted into an inn. The inn is running to this day, but it's not free of paranormal activity. The guests of this inn, to this day, report a number of paranormal activities going on at this place. Some say they hear the sounds of children laughing and walking up and down the halls. Some people say they even see a spectral figure at the rooftops of the building. Sometimes he smokes a cigar, and other times he holds a rifle, still keeping watch over the building to this day. Personally, I think it's very interesting that there's kind of two different horror stories that are happening in this one place. It's not really something I'd expect, because usually cheesy horror stories, they don't have a lot of thought put into them, but because this is in Savannah, they have the advantage of having these layers of history. It's very interesting to me, and the next one's pretty interesting too. Next we have the Marshall House, and this one is particularly interesting to me because they say it's been haunted since the moment it opened in 1851. During its time as a hotel, this place has been converted into a hospital 3 separate times. Once for the Civil War, and twice for yellow fever outbreaks. Over the next 150 years, it cycled through different names, but one thing remained consistent: some serious paranormal activity was reported here. A rumor goes along with this, actually. Back in 1998, they say that someone set out to restore the place, but they ran into some issues. Not only did the renovations cost upwards of $10 million, which is crazy, by the way, but they also found human remains under the floorboards. It is just a rumor, but supposedly while they were renovating, along with some old bottles and cans and things they found underneath the floorboards, they also found human remains, those being bone fragments dated back to the Civil War era. The theory is these bones got here back when the hotel was being used as a Civil War hospital. And if you didn't know, amputations in the Civil War were very common, and they were very brutal. Civil War era medical technology was barbaric at best, and lots of people endured lots of pain over these botched amputations that more often than not led to infections that killed them anyways. People who stay in this hotel today report seeing all sorts of paranormal things, from more mundane things like flickering lights and faucets turning on and off to seeing spectral figures with missing limbs. Some say they even smell something awful coming from no explainable place, like the smell of rotting flesh. If I'm going to be honest, this is probably my favorite spot that we're going to be talking about today. I just think there's still something to be said for the intensity here of this history. It's no affair, it's no suicide, it's no murder, but there's definitely death and pain and agony here, and I think it's very fascinating that it's achieved without any stereotypical horror-type things. Next up, we have the Old Candler Hospital. This was the first hospital to be established in Savannah, and originally it was for seasick sailors coming back from the ocean. It endured a lot of changes throughout the time it was operating, however, and it was even converted multiple times to accommodate for the yellow fever epidemic that struck Savannah. It also had a psychiatric ward, and if you've seen any shows or media about old mental facilities, you'll probably know how horrific that was, but The most notable thing here is the tunnel system that goes on underneath this hospital. This tunnel system is said to be completely underground, and it runs underneath the nearby Forsyth Park. They say back when the epidemic was running rampant that they used these tunnels as a way of transporting bodies in the night through horse-drawn carriages, after they passed away from the plague. The people in the hospital, though, they didn't want to worry the public by having them see just the sheer amount of people that were passing away from yellow fever, so in the days, while they were waiting for it to be night so they could cart away these bodies, they just kind of used these tunnels as a holding cell for these bodies. There was one special part of this tunnel system that led off into a dead end. It didn't go up anywhere, it was just used as a locker to store these bodies. They called it the death tunnel. I could only imagine how awful the smell there would be, and I can definitely understand why people would see paranormal activity in this area. Supposedly a part of the building is a law school now, but some people still document paranormal activity going on here. Most namely, people see apparitions around these tunnel systems, and there's one tree, it's an oak, it's about 16 feet wide. They call it the candler oak. Some people call it the hanging tree, because some people, they see paranormal apparitions hanging from the tree. A rumor about why there would be people hanging here in the past actually ties back to the psychiatric ward. It's completely rumor, but some people say when the shock therapy didn't work in the mental hospital, well, letting them hang out at the tree was their next best bet. I think this one's especially interesting too, just because I'm kind of a weird, morbid fan of old mental hospitals. It's just a fascination I can't really put my finger on, but we'll be moving on now, specifically to the mansion at 432 Abercorn Street. This house and its story is the most propelled by rumor, I think. Building started in 1869, and supposedly it was halted for a time because it turned out to be a burial ground for enslaved people, but when you know it, they kept on building anyways. Afterwards, the man who contracted the house, a man by the name of Benjamin Wilson, moved in with his family, his wife and daughter. Then, as the rumor goes, tragedy struck. His wife died not long after, and so stricken by grief, he didn't know what to do with it, turned into something evil, and it was directed towards his daughter. Supposedly, after he found out that his daughter had been making friends with some African-American children at her school, behind his back, by the way, he was very mad about it, he decided to tie her to a chair in her room and have her face a window and stare out at her school. He left her there for days, all the while during a Savannah heat wave with the window open. And back then, air conditioning wasn't really a thing. When he finally went to check up on her, she was dead. The one good thing about this story, though, is that it is fake. They have done some investigations, and they have found that Benjamin didn't die in this house, neither did either of his two daughters. The more likely true story is that in the 60s there was a triple child homicide. The story goes that there were 4 daughters left alone as their parents went out on the town. When their parents came back, they found the bodies of 3 of them dead in the living room. They found the 4th daughter hiding in a closet, terrified for her life. The rumor also goes that that 4th daughter is the woman that owns the house today. As far as paranormal goes, people claim that they feel a negative, dark, evil energy around the house, and some people even claim to see spectral apparitions at the windows. I think this one is probably the most mysterious and unsubstantiated of the things I've been talking about today. It makes me think someone really had it out for this Benjamin guy to make up such an awful story about what he did to his daughter. But anyways, we'll move on. Last but not least, we have the Gribble House and the axe murders of 1909. This one was also a triple homicide, and it was also 3 women that were murdered here. These 3 women were the owner of the house, Eliza, a 70-year-old woman, her daughter, Carrie Olander, and a friend of the family named Maggie Hunter. It was December 10th when it happened, and the details are gruesome and gory. Eliza was found with her head caved in, an axe in her skull. Carrie was found assaulted with her throat slit, and Maggie was found with a slit throat as well, though she survived the initial attack and only died in the hospital 3 days later. They say just before she died, she told who did the murder, J.C. Hunter, her recently estranged husband. The man was found guilty, and he was taken into custody. It was only a year later that he was sentenced to death, however, but things didn't quite work out the way they should have. Just before he was to die, his sentence changed. He served 12 years in prison, but in 1923, he was pardoned by the governor. He was made to roam free, and they say this injustice is what drives the paranormal activity in this area. The house is demolished now, and a warehouse takes its place, but there is still a lot of paranormal activity that goes on here. Some people say they see ghosts, hear voices, and some people even have scratch marks on their arms that they can't explain after going in this warehouse. I think the story's pretty fascinating too, and I think actually the more fascinating thing is the fact that this isn't even the half of all the ghost stories that happen in Savannah. I've been there myself. I've taken trolley tours. I've stayed in, old historic places here, and it's just incredible the history you can feel. So many stories, you'll just hear around the place. You don't even have to go on a tour to hear about them. I'd even go back to Savannah for a video one day, honestly. I mean, I love it there so much. I'd love the excuse, but that'd probably be down the line. I also think it's fascinating how many people are drawn in by this dark tourism. You'd think ghosts like these, such gruesome stories, would be a deterrent to people, but really it just draws them in. It makes you think that some of these people who fall in love with this town, maybe one day they'll become ghosts too, and they're kind of feeding this Ouroboros of horror in Savannah. I just think that's cool. But that's really all I gotta say. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found it entertaining. And I'll see you next week. Bye.